Drew Pavlou, on X at Drew, Pavlou. We've got about 12 minutes to break. I'll give you about 8-9 minutes, and then I'll come back and respond to what you say. But I've been the same for 31 years. I'm for world peace. That's why I study geopolitics. And I noticed from your comments, it's all about stuff on the ground and, oh, you saw atrocities. That's war. And I wonder, what do you think about Palestine? What do you think about Gaza? What do you think about Syria? You care about what's happening there. I'm going to get your overall views on that later, but you've got the floor now. So go ahead.
Listen, thank you, Mr. Jones, for having me on. I was surprised that you wanted to have me on, but I thank you for the opportunity. It's always good to have these sorts of discussions. I know you might think of me as a liberal. You might try and caricature me as a globalist. I want to quickly introduce myself to your viewers. Listen, I have been one of the loudest and most vocal opponents of the Chinese Communist Party in Australia, to the point that I literally had a kidnap plot against me by the Chinese government in 2022 in Australia. The Australian Federal Police literally informed me of that. They informed the Australian Senate of that fact. So I'm somebody who is fundamentally at my core, somebody who's anti-totalitarian, anti-communist. And my whole question to you is why you are on the side of the Russians when they are fighting under Soviet hammer and sickle flags in some of these areas. They are building up Stalin statues. They're building up Lenin statues in the occupied Ukrainian territories. The Ukrainians blow up the Lenin statues. They blow up the statues of Stalin. Stalin, remember, killed millions upon millions of Ukrainians in a genocide, the Holodomor. They starved millions of Ukrainians to death. The Bolsheviks, this is what they did to the Ukrainians. This is why fundamentally the Ukrainians do not want to be part of Russia. For me, this is fundamentally a question of, do the Ukrainians have a right to have their own country, have their own national identity, to be separate from Russia? If you go to Putin's interview with Tucker Carlson continued to bring up the point of NATO expansion. He continued to try and direct the conversation towards NATO expansion. And if you watch that interview, which I watched 3 or 4 times, Putin, over and over and over again, kept on steering the conversation away from NATO expansion and instead talking about 1,000-year-old historic claims to Ukraine, talking about Ukraine basically being always part of the Russian Empire, saying that the Ukrainian language is basically a fake language, the Ukrainian nation is basically a fake nation, essentially saying that Ukraine is a fake country, it should become part of Russia. And so this is not really just a question of, oh, well, NATO expanded around Russia. It's not really just a question as well of, oh, here are some provinces in the east where there might be some conflict. No, this is fundamentally a case of Putin and the Russian elite not accepting Ukraine as an independent country. They'll never accept Ukraine as an independent country. I don't want war, Alex, Mr. Jones. I don't want war. If I had my way, I would have a ceasefire right now down the current lines of control. Of course, in my heart of hearts, I would love to see Ukraine be able to take back the Donbass and Crimea. I think these territories are legitimately Ukrainian. They're part of the Ukrainian nation. But I went to Ukraine 2 months ago. I know that the people in Ukraine want peace. They want peace as well. They want a ceasefire. I think that they're willing to accept that maybe Ukraine will never legally recognize these as legitimate Russian territory, but they're willing to accept right now a de facto line of control on the ground, freeze the conflict right now. I want to ask you, Mr. Jones, whether you're familiar with the peace proposal that Ukraine brought to the Russians in Istanbul. They are offering right now full and unconditional ceasefire in the sky, on land, and at sea as a necessary background for the peace negotiations. They're asking for the Ukrainian children who have been deported and kidnapped and taken to Russia to be raised as Russians. They're asking for those children to be returned. I think any human being with a heart would have to say that the Ukrainian children who've been taken from the occupied territories and transferred to Russia, and they've disappeared into the Gulag system, they've disappeared. People don't know where these kids are. Anybody with a heart should have to say these kids need to be returned as part of a peace proposal, right? So listen, Mr. Jones, I'm not calling for total war against Russia. I don't want nuclear war with Russia. No one in their right mind wants this. What I would like, in my heart of hearts, I'd love to see Russia expelled from Crimea and the Donbass because I think they're Ukrainian territory. But listen, right now, if they could cease fire on the current lines of control, I think everybody in Ukraine would take that deal. Even Zelensky would take that deal. The Ukrainians are taking that deal to the Russians. They're saying, we will stop the war right now. Let's stop the war right now. Let's have no more attacks in the air. Listen, the other day when I called you out, Mr. Jones, this is the reason why. You were upset about the bombers that were blown up by the Ukrainians, the drones. And Fair enough. Listen, I understand that the way you explain this, you say that you're wanting to avoid nuclear war, you want to avoid escalation. Okay, I understand this. This is the problem, though, Mr. Jones. The day before that attack, the Russians launched the single largest drone strike the single largest attack against the Ukrainians in the entire 3.5-year war. 520 drones were launched against Ukraine. And these are sort of like the Iranian Shahed type drones. Iran is literally sending Russia the weapons. China's sending Russia the weapons. You know, I'm somebody who founded my whole political purpose on opposing the Chinese Communist Party, and they're fully backing Russia. They're fully backing Russia. Russia today is basically a state that defines itself by hating the West. You've had Dugin on your show. Dugin talks about how much he hates the West. Dugin talks about how the West is responsible for all colonization and evil in the world. He says that the Anglo-Saxons are the most evil people in the world. They talk about, you've had Solovyov on your show. Solovyov talks about nuking London, talks about nuking America. These people really, really hate America. They really, really hate the West. And I would love to have peace right now. I'd love to have peace right now. Let's literally have a ceasefire right now on the current lines of control. Stop all air attacks. Russia, the day before Ukraine hit those bombers, Russia launched 520 missiles against the Ukrainians. 520 missiles against the Ukrainians. Dozens of people in Ukraine were killed. Kids were killed. Now, this was the hypocrisy that I was calling out, Mr. Jones. I just don't understand how it can be fair that you're reserving so much outrage and anger for the Ukrainians when they blow up Russian bomber jets. But I don't see that from you, Mr. Jones, when they're bombing the Ukrainians. I've been there, right? I was in Ukraine in March. I went to Dobropilya in the Donbass, just as an independent reporter. Nobody was, I literally could go right up to I've seen this on the screen right now. I was filming an apartment complex that got hit by a Russian Iskander ballistic missile. I saw all these apartments, apartment after apartment after apartment, charred to a crisp, shrapnel in the walls. People talk about Ukraine as this country that is anti-Christian. This is the Russian propaganda. In these apartments that were burned to a crisp, I saw Orthodox icons in every single apartment, torn to bits with shrapnel and burned to a crisp because of what Russia did. They hit a ballistic missile into this apartment complex. They waited for the firefighters and ambulances to arrive, and then they hit the firefighters and ambulances with a cluster munition strike. And you could see the fragments from the cluster munitions bomblets in the walls everywhere around. And I put this in my video. I filmed this with my own camera, put it on my YouTube. There's no tricks here. You can see the cluster munition bomblets in every single building surrounding the square, right? Dozens of people were killed. This is what I don't understand. Why do you not have this outrage? Why do you not have this anger when the Russians do this? And they're doing this every single day. And
okay, so let me respond. You can come back. All right, we'll have you back again, too. We're going to come back after the break.
Sure.
A lot of nice emotional appeals. Very nice what you came up with. So let's just go through these one at a time quickly. Oh, they have Victory Day parades, and they're proud of Stalingrad, where over 6-7 million people died, and oh my gosh, these are communist. Well, what about the iconography of the Ukrainians and supporting the Nazis when it was the Nazis that invaded Ukraine? And much of the battles of World War II, we had 27 million Russians die in World War II, 24 million Germans. You have the floor. Go over these points now. So what about the standing ovation for the SS officer that actually on record oversaw the killing of 3,000 Jews in one pit? He's well known as the officer there. And they go, he fought Russians in World War II, and they do a 5-minute standing ovation. They know who fought the Nazis in World War II. So there they are. So you want to bring up the iconography of the Russians being proud of themselves in World War II and bring up some of those icons. Well, then you need to now defend this. Here's the standing ovation.
We have here in the chamber today Ukrainian Canadian world veteran from the Second World War who fought the Ukrainian independence against the Russians and continues to support the troops today, even at his age of 98.
All right, this goes on for 5 minutes, but it's on record. Then write your notes because you'll be able to come back and respond. But we're going to break a minute and a half. You'll come back and respond. Then you say, oh, they use cluster bombs. Well, it's on record that NATO started using them first. You call it Ukraine. Then You say Dugan and them hate the West. No, they hate the neoliberal, transhumanist West ideology that Americans hate as well and is anti-Christian antithetically. Use emotions about a bomb building. And so there's a picture of Jesus on the wall and a bullet hole in it. Putin just shot Jesus. That's emotion. Then you continue on and the key, and we'll go to break and come back and respond to all this. So write it down. You said, oh, Putin doubled his attacks or increased them the week before this 18-month planned Operation Spiderweb was launched against their strategic trifecta. But we know in the month before, Ukraine doubled their attacks. And right before the attacks of the new Pearl Harbor, we have on record, the German chancellor and the EU and NATO saying we're now authorizing long-range attacks. Then they happen days later. So you maybe, I don't think you're ignorant, you're smart. You know that on the eve of the peace deal and the month building up, Ukraine massively increased attacks. Zelensky, in his little cookie monster voice, his little dictator outfit, got up and said, we crushed him, Putin be dead soon, we hit Moscow every night, to mess up the peace deal. Then Putin responds back as he's about to escalate again, as he told Trump today. And it's like, oh my God, and our media doesn't cover it to deceive people. We'll be right back. Stay with us. But I want to invite Drew Pavlou back on to do a whole hour and a half Friday, if he can do it, or we can do it sometime next week, so we can have a larger discussion because there's so many points brought up here. I'd like him to respond back to my response. He can bring up any points he wants, but just to talk about them putting back up Stalin and Lenin statues where they got cut down by the Ukrainian government in eastern Ukraine. As anybody that knows Ukrainian history should thank Lenin. Putin is upset about that. That's where Russia started 1,000 years ago, was in Ukraine, in Kiev. On record, Lenin's the one that gave it its own sovereignty and made it its own country, and then made it where 40% of Russia's industry and weapons were produced, and where much of World War II after that was fought. And Russians really don't like Lenin. They see Stalin as a liberator from him and his persecution of Christians and kulaks and others. So I don't know if you know all that history. You seem like a pretty smart guy. Also, the Ukrainians on record, government, the NATO folks, they park everything in these residential areas for that, and you can respond to that if you don't, if you disagree with that. But at a larger point, Ukraine has broken every discussion or peace deal that has been brought up, and you didn't. So I'd like you to respond to, or you can deny it if you want. It's on record. The Cookie Monster, as I call him, bragged about it. Zelensky, that they had increased aeronautical attacks with missiles and drones in the month before this, and to kill the peace deal. And now Putin's about to respond. He told Trump that today, massively, to what just unfolded. And then, of course, there's the issue of hitting their nuclear strategic trident or system. Their three-pronged approach. We have the same doctrine here. And so that's a real concern to me. So I want to believe you, Drew, that you don't want nuclear war. I don't know if you know that in most of the war games that are done, this is leading directly to that. But you've got the floor for another 7 minutes or so to respond to any of that.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. I want to quickly say, I want to go point by point. Firstly, I'm not going to defend the stupid Canadian Parliament moment. This was just Trudeau being stupid. This is Trudeau's idiocy. Listen, if we want to talk about the Nazis, we can talk about Rusich, which is a neo-Nazi group with the Russians fighting for Russia in Ukraine. Listen, 7 million Ukrainians fought Nazi Germany. Zelensky's grandfather fought Nazi Germany. I really take issue with your idea that Lenin created Ukraine. Ukraine is a country with hundreds of years of history. The Ukrainian language has hundreds of years of history. In the time of the Tsars, 100 years prior to Lenin, the Russian Tsars issued orders, issued laws to try and ban the Ukrainian language because they were saying the Ukrainian language does not exist, and they had to put forward their own laws to try and ban the Ukrainian language. This is 100 years prior.
Let's ask you real quick. 1,000 years ago, Slavs are all called Slavs because the Orthodox priests in Ukraine that ended up founding Russia. I mean, you know about that, right?
Yeah, look. Of course, modern Russia kind of has its origins sort of in Kiev Rus, but it's a very complex situation because modern Russia was then divided from Kiev Rus by the fact that the Mongol hordes came in for hundreds of years,
and then the
so they
Muscovites
split off for hundreds of years.
liberated Ukraine.
Sorry, could you say that again?
And then it was, yeah, they conquered. And then it was the Moscow tribe of the Slavs that came and liberated what is Ukraine today later.
My point is that Ukraine and Russia, maybe they had a sort of somewhat shared history 1,000 years ago, but they diverged for hundreds of years because of the influence of the Mongols invading Russia. I mean, Ukraine developed its own identity. Ukraine developed its own language, its own peoplehood. And the fundamental question here is, do the Ukrainians want to be part of the Russian Empire? Tell me, Mr. Jones, would you want to be part of the Russian Empire? I mean, we know what Stalin did to the Ukrainians in the 1930s. I know you were saying, oh, well, the Ukrainians should actually be happy for Stalin and Lenin because Lenin created Ukraine.
Listen, I didn't say again, Stalin. Stalin persecuted the Ukrainians. I said Lenin.
Yeah, exactly. Would you accept, given the massive persecution of the Ukrainians, the Holodomor, the genocide of the Ukrainians by the Bolsheviks, would you accept? Of course, there is going to be a lot of strong feeling in Ukraine that they don't want.
Yeah, that's why the Ukrainians saw Hitler as a liberator in World War II. I never said that.
No. 7 million Ukrainians fought for the Soviet Union in World War II. So you can't say that the Ukrainians all saw Hitler as a liberator.
I didn't say that.
That's just too big a claim.
I mean, you take Freeland, the Trudeau's vice leader. I mean, her grandfather was one of the head Nazis there.
Listen, there was a tiny faction of Ukrainians that collaborated during World War II, but as I said,
Zelensky was asked 2 years ago about the Azov battalions being their core forces and being Nazis. He said, yes, they live here too. Yes, they are. Oh, big deal. Cookie Monster.
Listen. 7 million Ukrainians fought for the Soviet Union in World War II. Zelensky's own grandfather fought for the Soviets in World War II.
So what do you say about the Azov battalions and all their Nazi rituals?
Listen, Azov battalion was incorporated into the Ukrainian military many years back. They purged a lot of the more extremist Nazi elements. I don't agree with any far right stuff, but listen, at the end of the day, Russia has, hardcore Nazi elements in its army. They've got the Russich neo-Nazis in the army. Wagner, which was a massive force before the Prigozhin rebellion. Utkin, one of the lieutenants in that military, had SS tattoos on his collarbones. So there's this long history of neo-Nazism in the Russian military. And listen, I want to go through. You said, oh well, Dugin doesn't hate the West. He just hates the neoliberal, the New World Order, etc. Listen, let me read to you some Dugin quotes. He says, the West is geographical Satan, the Antichrist. He calls Anglos a race of rats. He calls them subalterns that oppress everybody. He calls for the destruction of the West. He actually has a quote once. He said the West should be cleared out and Chinese and Tajiks and Kazakhs should come in and settle the West to restore, freedom to the West. He says the West is dead land. He praised Robert Surratt. Recently,
oh, really? It doesn't sound like you're reading quotes there. It sounds like you're reading like sections.
No. These are literally his quotes. I did research.
No, I mean, I've read his books. Right? I didn't see that exactly. He's mainly
in his book.
He's mainly against the new Atlantis in the British Empire and Francis Bacon.
Can I ask you a question? Right? Would you accept that in his book that the manual that was very popular in Russia, the Russian military, etc. He actually says all of Ukraine except for Western Ukraine should be annexed and occupied by Russia. This is in his book. He says Ukraine should not exist. It's not a legitimate entity. All of Ukraine should be occupied by Russia.
Do you think his? I read the book.
Does that sound like NATO
part of Russia? My point is, I see that Russian claim. You can argue it both ways. It's mainly a Catholic Orthodox split that's been going on for 1,000 years. But let's just go back here for a minute. Okay, I'm not debating there's been beefs on all these sides, and that Russia's done stuff with the Poles and all the rest of it. What I'm saying to you is that. Do you understand everybody else's perspective? We don't want to be in a nuclear war over NATO using these divisions to try to weaken and bring down Russia. I mean, the deputy head of the EU Commission said 2 months ago, we want to use this to bankrupt Russia and break Russia up.
Listen, I'm not sure what exact quote or fact check you have on breaking up Russia, apparently that EU quote. But listen,
So you don't think Soros said we're going to break up Russia and I'll be the Tsar of Russia?
No, I don't think Soros has anything to do with this, man.
Soros's NGOs aren't involved in Ukraine or anything.
I think Soros is a very marginal figure. I mean, how many billions of dollars has Russia spent trying to
State Department front. Come on. Come on. I mean,
You know,
Soros is
interesting.
all
Can I
over
ask you this
the
question?
place trying to
It's
ban free
interesting.
speech. What do you make
It's
of
interesting you
Zelensky
bring up
being a
Max Blumenthal
dictator?
here.
Is Zelensky a
I
dictator?
want to ask you. I'm interested. You've got Max Blumenthal on the thing here. Are you aware Max Blumenthal is literally a communist? Like, he's a full-blown communist. He's a far-left communist. I'm just interested.
Well,
Alex,
let's move
why,
on from who posted it. There's the clip of the EU foreign policy chief and on the commission announces the West's goal is to divide Russia into smaller countries and use this war to bankrupt them. It's what she says. So will you respond to what she... No, you said you didn't know they said that. Let's talk about primary.
I'll go and watch that later.
I'll tell you what.
I'll go and watch that later.
Let's do this. We won't... Hey, find it where it's not Max Blumenthal. I want you to respond to what she's saying.
Sure. Listen, this is... Can I say something? I think it's very disingenuous to focus on one European leader's statement when you've got literally statement after statement after statement. Like, for example, have you seen
Medvedev's... Brzezinski didn't want to break up Russia?
Can I ask you, right? Are you familiar with what Medvedev has been saying? He says, a new idea for Ukraine has emerged from the North Atlantic office. Ukraine will be able to join NATO if it just gives up the disputed territories, but the entirety of Ukraine is a disputed territory. This is what Medvedev says. He says the entire Ukrainian identity should be crushed. You've got quotes like, do you know who Gubarov is, for example? He's the guy who founded the Donetsk People's Republic puppet statelet in the Donbass. He actually has a quote. This is actually a quote he had. He said, "We don't care if we have to kill 5 million Ukrainians or exterminate all of them. Anybody who sees themselves as Ukrainian, not Russian, we will kill." This was his quote, right? This is what the Russians say. This is what literally leaders in the Russian military say.
I'm not debating. There's a lot of bad blood, and I know about those quotes. And I know that Medvedev plays the bad cop and Putin plays the good cop. I get all that. What I'm saying to you is Americans don't want to pay $300 billion for this war, and I think Trump should leave NATO. And if you and others want to be like the Abraham Lincoln brigades, in Spain fighting the Nazis, but now you're on the side of the Nazi people, then you should go suit up with Lindsey Graham and Liz Cheney and go out there and fight them. Do you understand that?
Listen, here's the thing, Alex. Like, for example, the recent attack that Ukraine had in Russia, where they attacked the strategic bombers with drones, that didn't involve American capabilities. That was all indigenous Ukrainian know-how. When I went to Ukraine, I saw their drone production facilities.
So the U.S. giving them $300 million. Hold on. You're saying Ukraine doesn't need our money then?
Oh, look. I'd prefer if also. I think there should be an international coalition with, Europe should take up the big part of this. Obviously, Europe should pay more than America for sure, because Europe is the country. Europe is the continent, for example, that is directly threatened by Russian military.
So you support conscription that they're now launching all over Europe?
I don't think I said. Did I say conscription, Alex?
Let me stop you. Hold on just a minute. I'm asking you a question. This is logical.
Okay.
Germany's preparing conscription. 5 countries have launched it, including women. They say it's a 30-year war. They will break up Russia. That's the official policy. That's the business plan of the defense ministers. I can pull it all up, and the finance ministers. And so there's massive conscription going on. They're feeding people into meat grinders just to try to expend Russian arms production, which is 3-1 against Europe. And I'm asking you, is there conscription in Ukraine? And is Europe bringing back conscription for the war you just said they need to back?
Listen, I was in Ukraine 2 months ago. There's this big narrative that, for example, Tucker Carlson runs with, where he basically says that, there are no young men left in Ukraine. Everybody's been rounded up. Listen, every single place I went to probably about 10 different cities, 10 different towns across Ukraine over a 3-4 week period. I saw young men walking everywhere, unmolested by any street police. People sign up for the national draft. But for example, did you know, for example, there's a major source of tension between the United States and Zelensky.
Okay, I get it. There's no conscription, even though it's massive and on record. I'll ask you a question. You never answer questions.
18 to 24-year-olds.
Let's go back. Is Zelensky a dictator? Did he ban his political opposition? And is there conscription in Ukraine?
Okay. Did, for example, Churchill ban Oswald Mosley and the British National Union of Fascists during World War II? Did that make Churchill a dictator in World War II?
No, he still had elections.
Any country that's facing existential invasion.
We had elections here.
Any country.
Did Zelensky cancel elections?
Britain didn't hold elections during World War II, mate. Britain didn't hold elections during World War II.
The actual opposition to parties.
No. This is not true. The parties that were banned, for example, one of the parties that got banned, they literally had a guy at the start of the invasion call for Russia to nuke Ukraine. Tell me, if America was being invaded by China,
you're not being, in my view, you're not being honest. Is there conscription in Ukraine?
there is conscription for Ukraine, but there's no conscription for 18 to 24-year-olds. So did you know, for example, there's a big source of tension between the Trump administration and Ukraine, where the Trump administration has been saying to Zelensky, you have to conscript 18 to 24-year-olds. Zelensky doesn't want to send the 18 to 24-year-olds to the front line because they're worried that they will lose an entire generation of young men. So actually, if you look at the demographic makeup of both the Russian and the Ukrainian military,
6-year-olds, that's really sick.
Sorry. What do you mean conscripting the 6-year-olds?
Oh, I mean, I think the average age is like 55 now. So what about now we've got women dying?
No, I thought you said
Ukrainian.
6-year-olds. Sorry. Sorry,
I mean,
sorry. You go.
You
go
didn't
ahead.
know the average age of the new fighters like 55?
No, I was about to say that. No, I was literally about to say that. I was saying the demographic makeup of both the Russian and Ukrainian military is actually well over 40.
So it's a
the
form
young
of eugenics. They're getting rid of the old people. That works
No,
better
not
than the COVID
necessarily.
shot.
It's
What
it's
about
not a
the
form of
Down
eugenics
syndrome
necessarily.
guys? How's he doing?
Listen. I can't verify that. I have no idea about whether that's even a real video. As you would know, in war, people make up fake videos all the time. But listen, Mr. Jones. Tell me, if America was being invaded, would you support conscription? Would you think that people who avoided conscription were, betraying the nation? If America was literally being invaded right now, like surely, at what
we
point
are being
do you
invaded
think
by
that
the
Ukrainians can
UN
defend
and by
themselves?
the globalist system, the same ones encircling Russia.
Sorry, say that again.
The same globalists flooding Europe with Islamicists and all the rest of it are the ones doing that to me. So I have the same
Can I
enemies
ask you
as
this?
Russia.
Can I ask you this? What do you have to say about the fact that this is a verified fact? Belarus, Lukashenko in Belarus is a puppet state of basically the Russians. He's been flying over Iraqi men from Iraq. They've literally been flying over tens of thousands of young men from the Middle East using the Belarusian state airline to try send them over the border to Poland to try start migrant tensions. They did this as well in Finland. Russia was trying to push tens of thousands of migrants over the border.
And the U.S. is bringing Afghans in to fight. What do you think of Russia and the North Koreans?
That's horrible. Of course it's horrible. Of course it's horrible. I want to ask you this, right? How can you be on the same side as Russia when they're literally bringing in communists from North Korea to kill European Christians?
I mean, the globalists we have here are total Satanists. So you keep calling Russia communist. I don't agree with that definition. I don't like North Korea either. I like Trump's peace deal with them, but they're in an alliance with Russia, just like China and Iran. And so you've got Americans recruiting people from all over the world to go fight over there. That's how these wars work.
I need to ask you this question. Are you familiar with the fact that Dugin went on stage in Russia and he said, part of our war effort is to give opportunities to young men from the Middle East and Latin Americans. They're bringing mercenaries from Africa. They're bringing mercenaries from Latin America. They're bringing mercenaries from everywhere, all across the world. They bring in Bhutanese.
Let me ask you this. So it's Russia expanding. Russia's not expanding.
As well.
Russia's under attack. That's the whole point. So let me ask you this.
Russia's under attack.
Let me ask you this. Did Alexander Dugin's daughter need to die? Did Daria Dugina deserve to die?
No, listen, Mr. Jones. It's very unfortunate. Mr. Dugin has years and years and years where he literally said that Ukrainians should be genocided. He said Ukrainians should be exterminated. So past a certain point, in wars, horrible things happen. It's very horrible. I wish that nobody was ever killed. I wish the war never started. I wish
but
Russia
that's
didn't
the way it is. So she got blown up. So let me ask you this. I'm going to ask you again.
I mean, this is what I don't understand, Mr. Jones. Why you focus on Daria Dugina? Dude, three kids were murdered the other night by Russia in Ukraine. 3 kids were just killed in their beds. Why do you not share the tears for them? Where is it? I don't see it. You don't ever
specifically blew up her car. In wars, there's going to be collateral damage. You think Russia's trying to kill children?
Yes, I do.
Oh, really?
Okay,
Then why aren't they
explain
using artillery and just roll in and flatten all the cities then?
But they're doing this. There are cities in the east of Ukraine that have been bulldozed to the ground. Do you think Bakhmut even exists anymore? Some of these cities don't even exist anymore.
The population. Well, you know what Victor Booth said yesterday?
They've been pulverized.
He said that the Russians are getting ready. Let me give you a little bit of information. He said if Ukraine doesn't make a peace deal soon, as Trump has said as well, they're going to come in out of Belarus. They're going to encircle Kiev. They're going to give the civilians a week or so to leave, and then they're going to flatten it. So what do you think of that?
I mean, that sounds genocidal to me. Are you going to accept that? Of course not.
What do you think of Israel flattening Gaza?
Oh, listen. I think unfortunately the war has involved so much suffering, and I wish the war would end. Of course, Hamas unfortunately started that war.
What do you think of the U.S. bombing Dresden in World War II?
Well, bombing Dresden in World War II, unfortunately, Nazi Germany wouldn't surrender. I mean, I blame Nazi Germany for those.
What about the Japanese? They did try to surrender.
No, that was in 1944. That was in the late.
Nagasaki The Japanese did try to surrender. Did the Japanese deserve to have atomic bombs?
No, that's not true, Mr. Jones. That's not true,
really?
Mr. Jones. Are you familiar with the fact that after the bombing of Nagasaki, 2 atomic bombs, there was still a faction of the most hardcore imperial Japanese forces that tried to do a coup
I've seen
against
the
the emperor
letters. They tried to surrender before. Okay, listen.
No, they tried to prevent the surrender broadcast.
I want to tell you something in closing.
emperor-
I'll have you back on. You're not going to get your nuclear war.
I don't want a nuclear war.
Stop.
I don't want
NATO,
one.
I'll let you finish. NATO, Zbigniew Brzezinski, Victoria Nuland, George Soros, and we're going to take clips of this, and we're going to add all the clips of them after it. You say, oh, you're fact check or whatever. All said they were going to use Ukraine as the detonator to try to go to full war with Russia. Europe is mobilizing for war. You might think Napoleon was good. Maybe Hitler was good. I don't think you think that. The West needs to stop constantly trying to have wars with Russia, and we need to reform this.
If this is NATO expansion, can I ask you, if this is NATO expansion, why does Russia take the Ukrainian children and deport them to Russia to be raised as Russians? That's ethnic cleansing.
That's another ethnic cleansing, right? That's another piece where they've evacuated people and the media says they're kidnapping kids. All I know is they have the LGBT. Hey, what do you think of LGBT over here where they farm Christians' kids? Germany takes Christians' kids and gives them to convicted pedophiles. What do you think of that?
Mr. Jones, there are literally tens of thousands of Ukrainian kids that have been kidnapped and deported right now. And you're just saying, oh, well, what about the West? What about the West?
No.
Why can't you just say this is wrong? Why can't you just say straight up, it's wrong that Russia
you said a whole bunch of stuff that isn't true. It's a war zone.
They've taken these kids, though. Do you think that every single kid that was transported to Russia wants to be there?
World headquarters for organ harvesting and child human sex slavery trafficking?
They're trafficking children right now, Mr. Jones. They're trafficking Ukrainian children to Russia. The Russians are trafficking Ukrainian children out of
15 years ago
Ukraine.
banned sending us orphans, saying they were getting raped. And now we know they were. What about the million kidnapped kids in America brought them to the Democrats? Why don't you care about children?
Listen, no, you're saying that you care about children when you're literally ignoring the fact that Russia is deporting tens of thousands of kids, kidnapping them. They've been separated from their families. Some of these kids don't even, they've been deported into a fucking gulag. Why would you accept
talking points? You want to come on Friday? We'll do it again. But I want to do a Spaces where we talk maybe 30 minutes and then take commenters and people on Spaces. All right, I'm out of time. Drew, Pavlou, interesting discussion. NATO's expanding. The EU wants to break up Russia. The West is the aggressor, and it's insane. That's my view. All right.